Go ahead. You were talking about our discussion about the moon.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we were we both started talking about the moon in regards to how it seems to be slowing down, and there was there was I remember I think it was between August and September the full moon took a span of 30 days or 29
Yep.
days or something like that. Um, here's where I ran into a little bit of a thing. The moon phases are different than the moon cycles. So the okay, it, it's like that the moon's phases takes 27.5 days to go through from new moon to full moon, but the orbit of the actual moon takes 29.5 days. So what I'm going to deduce this down to is almost a sort of a half Mandela effect where because people are like, "Oh, aren't you just remembering the moon cycles wrong?" And it turns out, yeah, I kind of was. I mean, it still to this day says that the moon it takes 29.5 days to orbit the Earth, but the phases of the moon only takes 27 and a half days or 27.62 or whatever it was. So I was wondering if maybe we both got that confused because but it still feels like it still feels like it's longer than it should be, and I still feel like the seasons are not in a line with the calendar as they were when I was a teenager. So that being said, hopefully that maybe clears some things up. But I imagine you probably have older resources at your disposal, and yeah. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I see the logic of it, or I hear the logic of it. Um, where I would have the challenge with it is on Prime Video. I found a documentary on Prime Video, and it was a documentary from 5 years ago. And off the top of my head, I can't recall what the name of the video was, but it was talking about the moon and all of the wonderful aspects of the moon. And in it, it said about the moon cycle, and it was the 27 point whatever it is. And and this is where I have been pondering it because um, have you ever heard about the 72 in the Goetia?
Well, 72 is one of those numbers. So I mean, maybe not have heard of it in that context, but I'm aware of the
Well, in the
significance of 72.
well, yeah, in the Goetia, they talk about the 72 demons and the 72 counterpoints, which I guess you could label angels, and then the five top or hierarchy of demons or angels. Um, but through my research, I found out that a perfect solar eclipse takes how many minutes?
That I'm not sure of.
72.
72
So
minutes.
from the moment the full eclipse occurs when the moon is occulting the sun to the whole time until it's gone, 72 minutes.
Do you
The
know
same thing.
sorry, just do you know if all of the eclipses, the solar eclipses, they all are 72 minutes? Is that
Well, this is where I'm trying to find more evidence
okay?
or references to it because the Mayans have one of the best known calendars currently that has been shared with us commoners. And so the Mayans, if you think of their calendar, they had like a wheel within a wheel. Like if you think of a circle,
Well, 72 is 13 times 4, right?
right?
Yeah, and 13 was the original construct of the zodiacs. There was originally 13 of them. And there's 13
Right.
lunar months in a year and there's yeah, I mean these are pieces that I think everybody should be trying to put together. All these little pieces, like we're told to follow the solar calendar, but really, if you look at the lunar calendar, it's a little bit, it's a lot more accurate. There's no need for a leap year in a lunar calendar. There's all kinds of other things that correspond with the lunar calendar that farmers still to this day use. So yeah, it's definitely worth looking at, and I think these kind of pieces are all worth looking at. I wanted to ask, have you ever talked to anybody who lives on any of the coasts in your country? Because there's this tie with the moon and the tides, right? So if the moon's changing its orbit or its, time that it takes to get across the phases or whatever, theoretically we should be noticing a difference in the tides too. Now, I haven't actually looked into that yet, so I was wondering if you knew somebody, or have you looked into that sort of aspect of it, or do you even think the moon and the tides are connected?
Oh yeah, well I've talked to individuals on both the East Coast and the West Coast that if so say if you're on the East Coast and you're facing east and the moon is coming up over the horizon, well then you would have a low tide because all the water is being pulled towards the moon. And
Theoretically.
then and then well no, this is what's happening. This is what they're witnessing. And then after the moon passes over them, then you start witnessing the tide coming in. And then when the moon, if you're still facing east and the moon has gone up and over you and behind you, the further behind you until it gets to that point where that gravitational, and I use gravity in a sense of magnets, push and pull,
Yep.
that it will do that pulling.
Right. So you're
Now,
saying that basically, if you're standing on the beach on the Atlantic Ocean facing east and the moon rises, when you witness the moon rising, it will be a low tide, and when the moon passes over your head and sets in the west on the other side of you, that theoretically should make a high tide, right?
right now, the challenge also that occurs is in the moon's elliptis or orbit around us. There's moments of when it's closer to the Earth and further from the Earth. So that's going to cause somewhat of a shift also. But what will also cause a difference is your elevation of where you may be located on the beach, and also your longitude and latitude.
Okay, true, but the thing that doesn't match for that is that there's more than one high tide sometimes. Like so, and I've heard the explanation for this. It's like it's almost like a feedback loop. So the moon's orbit is exactly where it needs to be. Where when it's on the other side of the world, it's actually causing a high tide as well.
Yep.
So it's
Water displacement also will be a
right.
factor.
It's like a sloshing back and forth almost.
Correct.
So it would be interesting to see if we could get people that we both know and trust and get them to time the tides. Like, not, don't go online and look at when the tide's supposed to be in and when the tide's supposed to be out. Like, we need someone to go on the beach and like
Right.
put sticks in the ground basically, like,
Agree.
and take photographs and timestamp them and say, this is where the moon is, here's the moon, and then pan down, here's my stick in the beach, and here's where the tide is, and keep doing that. And I think we need to do that for at least, I mean, we probably would be able to see something after 3 months of doing this, but I would like to see it done over a span of at least 9 months or even a year, just so that we
Right.
can like literally like just write down, okay, I'm here in this part of the world, this latitude, this longitude, this is what time of day it is, this is where the tide is, this is where the moon is, all that stuff, and record that and see if it actually does correspond to what we were told that it's supposed to correspond to. Because I'm on your side, man. I feel like it's not the same as when it was,
Excuse me.
20 years ago.
Well, I agree because living in three different regions from Indianapolis, I lived in Indianapolis for 4 years, and then I lived in Minneapolis, St. Paul for many years, and then now I live up in northern Minnesota. And I remember that when I first moved here to Moorhead, Minnesota, that the 1st of October wasn't this cold. Every now and then you might get a little dip in the temperature, but like the consistency of the cold that's occurring, is way greater than it was when I first moved here. And this also correlates of when I started noticing the shift difference of the moon, because that also has a factor in it of I think it's called the transient or the path that the moon goes across the earth. Well, it in itself shifts to where it might do an ellipsis from the southeast corner, like it is right now. It's coming up from the southeast corner and setting in the northwest corner. It's doing this where I think it was 15, maybe 18 years ago, it was more parallel from East Coast to West Coast than it is at this diagonal right now. And so the pondering is, did the moon shift in its orbit? Sorry, I was eating grapes and I got a piece of skin on the back of my throat.
Tannins.
So, right. But, so did the tectonic plates shift or did the moon's orbit shift? And if it's the moon's orbit shifting, then that would be more of a causation to the electromagnetic pole shift.
Okay, yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Speaking of tectonic plates shifting, okay, so there's monuments all over the world, thousands of years old, all on different so-called tectonic plates that have been shifting for thousands of years as well. Yet all of these monuments are still perfectly aligned with the astrological constituents that they were meant to be aligned with, I guess you could say, or theorized. None of them have moved. So,
I would disagree with that.
Oh,
If you
okay?
research, yeah, I think his name is called Paul Liliovet, and he wrote a book called Earth Under Fire.
Well,
And
wasn't that
he
the book
was,
that was the sorry to interrupt, but wasn't that the book that was supposed to dispute the whole what do you call it when the Earth is like wobbling, the precession of the equinox? He was the one that was basically denying that the ancients had any knowledge of precession of the equinox. Is that the guy?
no, he was arguing that they knew about it because he's talking about the orientation of how so many thousands of years ago, the orientation and the stars lined up this way, and now they're off. And they kind of do this wobble back and forth. And he he basically, claims that because of this shift in this wobble, that it's almost like a calendar where it says, hey, every so many thousands of years, this is going to occur, which validates Immanuel Velikovsky and his stuff of, worlds in collision and ages of chaos.
What doesn't that tie into a lot of what the forgive me if I'm using the incorrect term, but Native Americans or what do you like to call them? Paleo Americans.
Paleo Americans,
I
yeah.
love that's okay. I just have to remember that, but I love the Paleo American term. Um, what don't they have similar like timelines where there's like epochs that are certain periods apart, and it's kind of uh like there's like the Vedas where there's I think it's like 26,000 years. The Mayan calendar
Yep.
has a tens of thousands of years cycle. So is it possible that maybe we're just not cognizant of timelines or cycles because they just go too long? Like, how are we supposed to know without getting to a spiritual level of having memory from a past life to be able to call these sort of cycles.
Well, this is where, it talks about a really good documentary out there is called Riddles and Stone, and they talk about Washington, D.C., or as I like to call it, Washington disease. And they talk about all of these structures are built specifically to an agreed upon position where it because it's in stone after a period of time or illusion that it will make these denotations about pay attention because that's what my ancestors do. Because another thing, like right now, we're about to go into the new moon. So when this new moon occurs, one thing that's really cool to notice is when the sliver of the light of the moon starts occurring, if you look at it as a face of a clock, the sliver will come in, let's just say for explanation purposes, that the sliver will come between 2 and 4 o'clock on a dial of a clock. So then after that new moon occurs, and then the next new moon occurs, then that sliver is going to come up between 3 and 5 o'clock. And then on the next new moon, it's going to come up between 4 and 6 o'clock. And so it does this like full rotation around the dial, more or less, of a clock.
But
And
but
it,
the only differences between a clock and the moon cycle is that there's 13 full moons in a year and only 12 hours in a day on a clock.
right, but I'm I'm not using the clock as a reference of time. I'm using it as a reference of location.
Yeah, position. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And so then if you think about like pi and you think of a circle and how pi will go, when you divide it by 3 pi, you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
When you take the radius and you divide it in the circumference, it does it 3 and just a little oomphed more to where it just doesn't make it on the full circle. And that's the whole pi. So then there has to be, if you go around clockwise, then you go all the way past 12, just a tiny bit. And then you have to reorientate where 12 is. And so you shift the clock a little bit counterclockwise. So where it ends is now midnight. And then
Yep.
you go around
I
again.
get it. It's
And
like you're adding another arm to the clock. It's like you're adding a
yes,
third arm to the clock, basically.
yes. And as that cycle continues and you keep shifting it, the next thing you know, all of a sudden we have a full year in the denotation of the Earth going around the sun, where it will have 14 moons.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay, this is
And
awesome.
then and then when that occurs, the indigenous people, the Paleo Americans or whatever around the world, they say, hey, this is when that extra constellation is being driven home. And what was that extra constellation? The dragon, the serpent.
Do you see the similarities here with like this, what you're talking about, and the religions with like I get one example would be the second coming of Christ. Another example would be like, that God will return to earth and save humanity from its
The
own
second
destruction. The
son,
second son, exactly. And
the
okay,
second son.
what do you know? Okay, what do you know about the actual? And I'm gonna say this in a weird way. I hope I don't freak people out. But what I mean by second son is the possibility, and I stress the word possibility, and I put underline it, and I put quotations over both sides of it. The possibility of an actual second son. that has always been there. We just can't see it because the first sun is so bright that we can't see what's actually behind it, which could possibly be a second sun. I mean, there's a lot of old alchemical texts that talk about the existence of an actual second sun. Whether or not it's an actual physical second sun, I don't know, but it's sort of something that's been occulted, and it's been apparently photographed. Or I mean, it could be lens flare, but I know the difference between lens flare and not lens flare. Some of these photographs, they're either really, really well doctored, or there's the potential of a second, or maybe that's the primary source of the light, and then there's some kind of lens in front of it. I don't know, but the idea of a second sun. What do you think about that? And what is there any tie-ins with the Paleo American belief systems? Because I believe that those are as old, if not older, um, uh, as compared to like the Aborigines of Australia. Like they're very old, especially the new research coming out with all these ancient artifacts that are not supposed to be there in North America, that were there like before the pyramids were even built, kind of thing.
That the cradle of civilization is North America. And when North America, or Pangea, when allegedly there was one huge landmass, that the center of it was North America, and that the individuals followed the sun, the entities. And to me, it makes logical sense, because if the sun rises in the east and you witness it, then it goes and sets in the west, then would you not logically follow the light instead of following the darkness? And so you would think, in a sense, that if there were people living on the east coast of America, that they would follow the sun to the west, and then they get up there into Alaska and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, look, a buried straits." Theory. And because it wasn't a one-way sign.
You're right, but
So if the
I
buried
mean,
straits were there,
I think that they would. I mean, I don't look at it as that sort of like they were that primitive minded, where it was just like they were following a light. Because the structures that they built and the way that they're aligned, and I mean, it just, to me, exhibits too much knowledge of what's, they had a lot more knowledge of the, I guess, the sky. That, I mean, I'm not saying they could travel the stars or anything like that, but I mean, there are old, tribal legends of people that came from the stars. I mean, they're all over the place, scattered like seasoning on Earth's history. Uh, so the idea that they're just following a star because they're just following a light in the sky, to me, I mean, I can understand that, but at the same time, I like to believe that they probably knew more about it than just following a light in the sky.
that it is systematically being created where information is so readily available at our fingertips, no one is remembering anything or learning anything. And so if the proverbial propellers got hit by the excrement, we are in a world of hurt because books have now been made to where they don't even last 50 years because the paper is so crappy. And unless it's written in stone, it is not going to survive a cataclysmic event. And so we will literally be knocked back into the Stone Age when people can't even write cursive anymore, or even print legibly, or even remember how to create a basic motor.
Hey,
Or
maybe that's where the term well, hey, it's not written in stone came from, and also if it's not written in stone, it well, if it is written in stone, I should say, it's not susceptible to the Mandela effect, is it?
well, that's the whole thing because if something is written in stone, then would that make a denotation that, hey, this is important to know? Or is it a direct, deliberate slap in the face by carving a bunch of known Native American or Paleo American destroyers on the side of a mountain?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a really good question. How do we know? How do you discern that? Like, how do you? I mean, without having some sort of a like a I guess a right hand man sort of a analogy to a different kind of knowledge. How would you even be able to discern? I mean,
But
it's very analogistic to to the society that we live in today.
yeah, well, I think it could easily be argued that we are metaphorically being led by our noses through the rose garden, and the oldest book in the oldest trick in the book is distraction. And if they can keep us away from the synchronization of the greater cycles, then not only would it be disruptive internally, but externally, especially when you ponder about how the moon affects the water and where we are allegedly over 80% water, and women I think are even like 85% over of water. And
And
I don't
the
know.
moon is often represented as sort of like the feminine sort of side of things too.
Yes, and I don't know about you, but I have had many conversations with my friends that are of the genderization 40 years ago women, if I said that delicately enough. But they are going through some major challenges. We always go through challenges,
I still call
but
them girls, man.
I I'm not trying to offend anybody. So unless I know specifically who's listening to us, I would rather, because I'm not in the want of causing negativity. I'd rather help find neutrality, but positivity is definitely a goal of mine. And so I'm always feeling sorry of
Keep your
upsetting somebody or
keep your comedy in your back pocket.
I don't know if I'll do that, but I'll wear it on my sleeve. But I mean, unfortunately, I'm not doing open mic right now, and if I was, I'd be like, slipping out all the jokes and stuff. And I guess political correctness when it comes to comedy, I think,
Yo,
don't work together.
this is just as open of a mic as it would be on open mic.
Oh yeah? Well, these two blondes walk into a bar. The first one said, "Ow." The second one said, "Get out of my way."
Yeah, there's another. There's okay. These two blondes walk into a bar. You'd think both of them would have seen it.
No, because they were raised in today's society and they were looking down at their cell phone and wondering if they should review
The bar
or
is lower.
subscribe. Right?
they
They lowered the
they
bar.
lowered the bar, so all the blondes now hit. All the blondes now walk into the bar because the bar is so damn low.
Right. But there is always the exception of the rules. I've met a couple brunettes and a couple redheads, and I don't know what to think about people that are bottle blondes that are like, hey, maybe I need to bleach my hair.
Yeah, that's like a suicide blonde, like the NXS song.
Yeah,
That's what it's about.
which which is ironic if you look at as a trained cosmetologist and knowing what I know now, one of the biggest challenges that women have is thyroid cancer. And
Comes
what
from
do you
hair
think
dye.
happens? Yep.
Yep.
And if you look at the women of African descent, that's their number one killer is thyroid cancer. And look at these horrific straighteners and products for the highly textured hair, all because they're not recognized as miracles in the uniqueness of their kinky hair. But it's like, no, I need straight hair because straight hair is considered better. But
I hear you. I hear you. And I've seen it too. I used to be with somebody who was a color technician, and she did all that kind of chemical work with colors, and that was our common ground was colors. And I found it fascinating how colors worked kind of almost in an opposite direction in hair color that they did in photography, which was a fascinating subject we often talked about.
back in the day, my hair used to be such a dark purple, it looked black. But if the sun was behind me, you could see like a hue of purple in it.
What do you attribute that to? Is that something in your diet?
No, it was the color that I dyed my hair with.
So what did you use to dye your hair then?
I used to be a Logic fanatic, which was a brand name of a hair color.
I used to use
And
Kool-Aid.
but yeah, I used to when I used to be what we called back in the day in the 90s a dark sider, which kind of morphed into goth
I was just
and
gonna
it
say
morphed into
you're just an
emo.
old school goth. Okay, you're like that bad guy in Highlander.
Yeah, we were like no, no, no. That was more kind of punky. I was like Robert Smith and The Cure and Susie and the Banshees and Tones on Tail and Love and Rockets and you know that I think back then at first it was called New Age
Yeah,
music,
that was the beginnings of goth. That was when goth was happy.
right? Well, even yeah, that was the funny part is even like the like the Smiths. I think it was when all of a sudden goths started getting like poor me and life is miserable and it just all sucks.
Well, hey, if you look like Morrissey, life's got to be pretty miserable.
That's why I liked Robert Smith, and I can't confirm or deny many times I've put on eyeliner and maybe smeared lipstick and wore a skirt every now and then.
Oh, guy liner.
Guy yes. Which was really hard because of being Native American descent. I would tan really easy in the summer, and so I would try to avoid the sun and put on sunblock, and every now and then I would even have to put on some foundation of a lighter tone so I didn't look so tan because
Well,
it didn't
didn't
work.
isn't there like a eyeliner, like a ceremonial eyeliner that guys like wear in like powwows or ceremonies or anything like that?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about like war paint, which was termed war paint
Not
from,
necessarily, no, not just war paint, but like like rituals or like like equinox ceremonies or stuff like that. I mean, I know in like South America they totally do that, and they do it to like it's to accent the whites of the eyes.
well, um, there's definitely face painting that goes on, especially if an individual was to have a dream or they did a vision quest or a fasting where in that period of being alone and they contemplate their life, all of a sudden they say, you know what, my identity is I'm going to put a big red circle on my left cheek. And that's what they did. So if that's, once you did your fasting and you did you're reflecting on who am I, because what a wonderful way to figure out what you're going to do and who you are than doing a 4-day fast where you're sitting still in one area and contemplating your existence.
in
I think you would
in
come up with a
silence.
pretty good plan.
Yeah, no, that's something I encourage anybody who listens to this after the fact that we record it. Like, if you get a chance to actually sit in silence for an extended period of time, and this doesn't include sleeping. I mean, like, if you want, you can pretend like you're trying to go to sleep. That's fine, but you sit in silence with preferably in the dark, in like with your eyes closed. You don't have to be sitting down in lotus position. Like, you can lie down. You can like be as comfortable as you can and see how long you can sit there in complete silence without having to go to the bathroom, without having to get up, get something to eat. And I guarantee you, most people won't even last like maybe. I'm going to be very gracious here and say 10 hours without wanting to at least get something to drink or something to eat, or like these people that go off on these walkabouts or these go sit in a cave for like extended periods of time, or they do the initiations. They push their limits like deprivation to the point of almost walking on the line of causing serious health concerns. I'm not saying people go out and do
Well, I
that,
do that same thing.
but
I,
yeah,
you know, I,
starve yourself, see what happens, and then when you're
I,
really hungry, go another hour, and then next time when you're really hungry, go another hour, and just see how far you can push yourself. And I think that's like it's the same as plants. Plants, they do their best growth under a lot of stress, and I think the same can be said to spiritual human growth and even physical human growth. The
oh,
whole
I
saying, yeah,
absolutely agree that through the struggling we learn.
like the whole no pain no gain cliche, which I don't like, but I mean, I guess the reason why it's a cliche is because it's true.
Right. Well, it works at least,
Yeah,
and if it's not broken, don't fix it. And that's one of the biggest challenges of today's world, because somebody's looking at it from some perspective and they're like, this doesn't work. It
yeah.
should be like this,
Well,
instead
one
of asking the group, how do you think it should be?
I still have an argument with the whole "if it's not broke, don't fix it" cliche, because just because it's not broken, it doesn't mean that it can't be made better. So,
So
okay,
that's true.
I'm not
I
fixing
agree
it,
there.
but it can still be modified. It can still be made better. And that's,
Right.
I think, a trap a lot of people fall into is, well, it's not broken, let's not fix it.
Well, that's funny you say that, because today, um, I went 6 months without the VA coming into my home and helping me with my daily living activities. And finally, over like the last 2.5 months, I finally have gotten services again. And there's part of me that just didn't want any services because I got so used to just having total freedom in my own time. But then you get people that come into your home, and unfortunately, they're coming in from their perspective, where instead of listening to me of how I want my home, people will come in with the ideology like, oh, it should be like this, And so just today, I talk to somebody where it's like, I would rather not pull out the "it's my house" card on you. I'm willing to listen to your opinion, and if you can help me find more productivity or efficiency in a task that is needing to be done, I'm all about, changing it if I believe or if I think it will work. Unfortunately, because of my stubbornness, you better have your PowerPoint presentation and your references and your charts and graphs and everything, because it's not always an easy argument just because you say it. That's the biggest challenge, because it's like, oh, it should be like this, and it's like, well, why? Well, because I think it should be like this.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. Is like, why should somebody have just because of you know how they originally perceive things? How is that supposed to be the be all end all? Like, it seems like a lot of things are kind of deduced down to, well, either you agree with it or you don't agree with it, and there's no sort of like avenue for other thought processes. Um,
Right.
yeah, and to me, that's, I don't know. Like, I always look at the two choices given in most arguments. I mean, you can pretty much, especially in the truth community, um, you know, it's like, is there Illuminati or is there not Illuminati? Is Trump a puppet or is Trump not a puppet? Is the world,
Puppet.
or yeah, their trumpet, um, is is the world flat or is the world round? Is
Well,
is
that's
it
the beauty of polarity.
is it
That
communism or is it democracy, or like, there's never, well, what if I can think of like four other ideas that don't even come close to either of those two?
Well, this is where, and I'm still upset with myself because I've been talking about this book for 20 years now, but I call it spherical enlightenment, where, like we were talking earlier about the circle, where the circle is the two-dimensional representation of the sphere, which is three-dimensional. And so if you think of a circle and you think of your center point, and your center point is your challenge, and if you're looking at it from, again, using a clock for positioning, if you're at 3 o'clock and you're looking at the center, then you're only looking at it from your perspective. But then if you're able to change your perspective and go over to 9 o'clock and look at it from that angle, and better yet, if you can go up to 12 o'clock and check it from that perspective, and then go down to 6 o'clock. So, how much better of a decision are you going to make potentially if you look at it from a well rounded position?
I would say
But we get,
exponentially better. And the more angles you can get around it, in my opinion, the better that you'd be able to actually formulate like a concrete perspective. And that's another thing, is that I don't think people should actually cement their perspectives, because you never know what's going to come up. Like, it could change what you know, or it could change what you think you knew, and it might have to, you might have to change or augment your perspective to adapt to it, or at least to integrate that piece of information that can't be ignored. It needs to be integrated somehow, and so it's important for your perspective to be flexible at all times, in my opinion, especially in times of retrograde like we're in right now, with both Mars and Mercury in retrograde, which may or may not mean anything.
Are you still there, Paul?
Yep. Sorry, my computer went a bit blank up.
Nice. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible and exciting to be here in this precious moment with you because I would not change any of the pain and suffering that I've gone through in this existence in my flesh suit, to be in the fortune that I'm in right now, with not only being here with you, but having the opportunity to experience the moments with my kids and the moments with other miracles. Because I'm excited about tomorrow. I'm excited about the next hour, because I know that this next moment or this next minute or this next hour isn't going to be the same as right now because there is no now. There it goes. There
Right
goes
on,
another
man.
now. There
Right.
goes another now.
That's amazing that you say that too, because like, I mean, I find like I'm terrified, but that's the same thing as excited. It's just all you have to do if you're terrified is tweak one or two little tiny screws of perspective, and the terrify becomes excitement. Um, I mean, to, to give an analogy, it would be like uh, going up a huge roller coaster and you're scared of heights, but you like to go fast.
It's
So
only a ride.
so you're terrified the whole way up, but as soon as you go on your way down, the rest of the ride is amazing. So yeah, I
Well,
agree.
even the excitement of being scared,
Yeah, that's what I
you
mean.
know,
I mean, the
even
what's about to happen in the next like month or maybe two is going to be terrifying for a lot of people, but exciting at the same time. I mean, we're at the threshold of something of a change of magnitude. In my opinion, that is, uh, it's going to be a bigger shift than anything that our grandparents experienced even.
well, see that's where I would somewhat disagree because every moment is the potential of a monumental shift or an apocalypse. Because an apocalypse is denotated as the great revealing. And it's a revealing that is so abundant that it basically changes your course of action or it flip flops. It's like that snow globe, like somebody grabbed your snow globe and just shook the hell out of it, and that's the apocalypse, but eventually at some perspective, it's going to settle down. To what extent? Who knows? You know, those prophetic individuals that are synchronized with the greater cycles that are efficient at predicting the cycle because they're paying attention to the cycles. And nothing will disrupt a cycle like adding in another cycle because we're all spinning plates. And the
Yeah.
more plates you spin, the more chaotic it is. But think about it, even the excitement, like when you were a kid and you're going to scare your brothers or your sisters or your parents or whatever, and you would hide behind something. Do you remember how excited you would get to scare somebody?
Yeah.
And that's that kind of that excitement. You know, my kids actually they get frustrated because they try to scare me, which is fairly easy to do sometimes because I'm blind. But they get upset because they can't scare me. Because I have such a in tune ear, and in my home I know every crack and every little creak in my floors, and even like how sound will change when someone's in the hallway.
Yep.
And just stuff like that. So they'll try to creep up behind me, and I'll wait for them to get really close, and I'll be like, "What do you want?" And then they just be like, "Dad," But then when you hear them scare each other, it's and I can't confirm or deny. I sometimes antagonize the scaring factor of the two of them, or I'll be like, "Hide, your sister's coming."
Speaking of scaring, let me ask you this: what do you think the idea of fear? Like, do you think fear is always a detrimental thing, or do you think fear has something to do with the way that we possibly evolved into, a being of sort of more caution? Like, fear could have led to caution, maybe caution could have led to consideration. I mean, like, what? How do you feel about fear? Because a lot of people say fear is just like something. It's like a that's it. You should just not associate yourself with fear, and fear is meant to be avoided at all costs. And fear is
Now,
bad, and you know what I mean?
um, if you recall how I always bring up my holy trinity of positive, neutral, and negative, well, how do we put fear in that construct? Fear in itself is neutral. Fear negative is if you're so caught up in that fear that you're immobile, that you're unable to function in your normalcy, But where is fear positive? Well, I'm afraid of catching a cold, so I build up my immune system. I'm afraid I'm going to run out of gas, so I fill up the tank. I'm afraid I'm not going to eat, so I go to the grocery store. So it depending on the perspective of the individual, fear can be a great motivator, but on the other perspective, it could be a total bummer if you're so fearful you're solidified where you're at.
Yeah, so it's like if you don't know how to use a perspective, then I mean, it seems to me like perspective is the almost the first tool that should be taught uh, to a living individual is perspective. Um, because with perspective, you can change anything from a fear into a tool, or from a detriment into a positive, or a trauma into a lesson even. And I'm not trying to say that people's traumas aren't legitimate or anything like that. I'm just saying, some people go through things and they're able to turn it around, and some people go through the same things and they're not able to turn it around. And to me, it would seem the only difference there is the know how to use their own perspective to their advantage.
This is the challenge of some semantics, on how we want to generalize it. And if we go back to that whole circle, and if we go back to changing your perspective, if you have one perspective, then you have two perspectives. You're polarized. But then if you have three perspectives, then you're a triangle, which is the two-dimensional representation of the pyramid, the true pyramid. And then if you got four perspectives, then you're looking at the two-dimensional representation of the cube. And then when you get five, and then six, and then now we're all of a sudden into sacred geometry. So it's that ability to look within love without fear at your core, or at your center, or at your neutrality, that we find the best observation for a choice of direction or a choice of action. And when we can reflect on this choice with a group of people, then is it not how to create a harmonious community? Because it's so much easier to get something accomplished when there's more than just you doing it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with you there. I mean, the more heads you got in in the plan, the better. In my opinion, the more perspectives you can add to your repertoire, the the in my opinion, the broader scope you're capable of looking at things.
right?
So yeah, it's and that being said, it's important to if someone brings to you a perspective that doesn't really necessarily jive with what your perspective has been your whole entire life, it doesn't mean you need to go on the defensive or anything like that. Um, 9 times out of 10, people with different perspectives are more than willing to listen to why you disagree, or maybe even learn a new perspective from you, and maybe their perspective will change as a result. I mean, there's it's an endless possibility as long as you uh, don't be, what is that? Fear of attachment, or something like that. There's this thing where you need to like not be attached to stuff, especially in retrogrades. Um, don't be attached to ideas, to people, to physical things. Um, just because that can put the blinders on you, so to speak, as far as perspective goes.
Right. Well, I apologize. I'm going to cut this short because I don't want to step over Kev's pre-show. But also, what I wanted to bring up is, as an Anishinaabe, we have a formal word for hello, and it's bonjour. And the reason why when we meet somebody, we say bonjour, and as we become more familiar with them, then we say anin. But we say bonjour because it is in homage or reference to Wayne Boozhoo or Nana Boozhoo, which were called the great teachers. And so when we meet somebody and we say bonjour, it's almost like saying, are you Wayne Boozhoo or Nana Boozhoo here to teach me? Because we're taught that every entity that you meet has something that you can learn, or something that can be taught to you. And if you're willing to let go of your ego or your hubris, then it's a lot easier to look at it from that other individual's perspective. And if it works, if it helps you become more proficient or effective, or it adds to your perfection, then why not?
And why not share it if it does too?
Absolutely. Is it selfish to hoard all of this knowledge, or should it be shared?
Is it
It
selfish to
could be shared.
is it selfish to thank you so much for having this chat with me right now?
Well, no, thank you, my dear friend.
We will chat again soon. I'm almost certain. Unless something cataclysmic happens with the internet, we will definitely be chatting soon. So I guess just because there is a possibility that I may post this on YouTube, I should do some sort of formal like outro or something like that. Um, Thanks KBS for letting us do the open mic. We I got your message. We're not gonna overlap on your shows ever, dude, because that's never gonna happen. So anybody listening now should be ready for a pre-show because Scotty's coming on later, and Thursday Scotty shows, they're always awesome. I'll see you in the chat. NeSe, thank you again. I will be in touch very soon. We need to do another open mic at some point. We can talk about the moon a little bit more, and maybe some other cool stuff. Any closing words? Now's the time to say 'em, brother.
Now is the time. I'm not a fan of that slogan, but whatever. No. Um, yeah, I'll give you a secret. Tomorrow night, Freaky Friday, I get to be honored and blessed to be with the Woo crew. So check it out. Be there or be a Merkaba. Ape Gish Bimadazi Riyan. Toodles.
Stay bright, y'all.